Hello and welcome to It'll Be Alright in the 90s, the official podcast of the Ledette generation. We've applied our wet look hair gel, put on our wraparound sunglasses, and we're ready to go. Stu, is that a Bacardi Breezy you're drinking there?
Certainly, there was no Blackadder available. I don't know if you remember that, but
yeah. Blackadder, I don't remember Blackadder. No, what was was it? Blackadder, another Alco Pop?
It was, yeah. Obviously, very very vague memory of it for me because I was like 7 or 8 at the time. But yeah, I do remember it being popular down at the Springfield back in the day with the older kids. Yeah, so I'll have to look that up afterwards. Actually,
yeah, I've never heard of
drinks of the 90s next time.
Yeah, drinks of the 90s. That's definite.
But yes, I'm enjoying this refreshing Alcopop beverage. Thank you very much.
Good. How have you been anyway, apart from that?
Yeah, not too bad. Looking forward to. I've got so many notes for this episode. I thought it started slowly and then gradually snowballed, and we got plenty of good correspondence and everything else. So yeah, I think it's going to be a good one today.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, it's a topic that is very close to my heart, as they all are, but this one especially. As I'm sure you all know, it's going to be about Formula One in the 90s, and specifically the odder moments of the decade in the sport. So we'll be talking about that shortly. First off, I should say that today's episode is sponsored by Elf petrol stations. And they're offering our listeners a really, really fabulous offer, actually. If you pull onto one of their forecourts during the months of October and November and fill your vehicle with a full tank of 4-star petrol, quote the code ALLRIGHT90s and you'll get 10% off their range of charcoals, kindling and firelighters. Obviously, we're coming to autumn now, so the temperatures are starting to drop, so I'm sure you're all going to be getting your fires lit. So you're going to really benefit from that offer. And so make the most of it on us. So thanks again to Elf Petrol Stations. That's this episode's sponsor.
Brilliant. Thank you to the guys at Elf with their filling station just opposite the Hungry Horse down there in Chippenham. But please do take a note from us and please remain aware. Don't use any of the kit that you buy on the petrol station forecourt. Please move it away to your homes before you start using firelighters and things like that, because that could be very bad.
Good point. That's actually the specific petrol station I was thinking about when they got in contact. That's the one by the railway bridge, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
Sort of the gateway to Chippenham, as it were.
Yes. In fact, a friend of mine who's sent in some correspondence for us to read out in a second, I believe he had a motorcycle accident right next to the Elf filling station in Chippenham. So there we go. How about that? I mean, it's absolutely fine. And I'm sure when he listens back to this, he'll, he might even write in and give us some more of the circumstances. But yes, I think that's right. Well, let us know, George. Let us know.
Yeah, if he did, that's very close to the what's his name's the site of the crash.
Eddie Cochran, Eddie Cochran, just up the hill, absolutely.
Local history, I'm afraid, if you're not from northwest Wiltshire like we are, but yeah, Eddie Cochran was sadly killed very close to that in Chippenham. There's a memorial there, and local Chippenham history, which may or may not get edited out. Okay, so let's move on to the mailbag. I have a couple of things. I know you do too.
Yep.
I'm going to just quickly start with an email. I think this is the first ever email we've actually received. So thank you to Nicola for this. And Nicola emailed in with the following: "Hi, all right in the 90s. Loving the pod. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I particularly enjoyed the irony of you asking a child who went deaf as a result of the Tango advert to get in touch after listening to a podcast, which is a very good point and." Another example of me embarrassing myself, which I think is the 4th or 5th time I've done that in the last 2 episodes. But she also said she did not enjoy being reminded of the Windows advert, which I think refers to the
Safe Style,
the Safe Style advert, which we talked about in our advert episode. She says it might be her most hated advert of all time, although she has remembered it after all this time, so some credit must be due for that, which I think we sort of touched upon, didn't we? We said it's really irritating, but everyone remembers it. So yes,
and that's probably what makes it so memorable.
Yeah, and she finishes by saying, "You must get asked this all the time, but can I have a signed photograph of you, maybe from the 90s? And also, if you make merch, I'd buy it." So
Well, there you go. There's two things there, isn't there, to consider. I mean, I listen to Popmaster every morning, and people are always asking Ken Bruce for his signed photo. So why not us?
Yeah.
You know, why not us?
I'll dig out a picture of me, and maybe you could do the same, and we'll get that signed and sent over. Well, yeah, when it comes to merch, my dear brother, who who actually designs the logo for this podcast, did make me a T-shirt with the logo background in the T-shirt. So yeah, it feels like there's a potential avenue there for some high-end merch.
Yeah.
So
well, we'll look into it and we'll keep you all posted. But we better keep this on the quiet from Adam, otherwise he's going to want some commish, isn't he? So that's
true.
Let's just keep it quiet and when he's listening to this episode, maybe we can like cough over it or something. If we happen to be in the same room as him when he's listening to it, I don't know. Seems unlikely, but
So yeah, what about you in terms of mail? Have you got
a few quick things here from just catching up from various episodes. My dad gets in touch, friend and sometimes erstwhile star of the pod, from various stories that have come out over the past few episodes. And with regards to the Joslin theory from the Britpop episode, where I was positing my theory that bands' best known songs are quite often their worst. He disputes my assertion that Living on a Prayer is the worst Bon Jovi song, and he says that he thinks it's Always, which I have to disagree with. I actually think Always is a bit of a banger, especially the live in Wembley Stadium version, 95, I think it is, from the and they made like a concert video. It's all on YouTube again, so go and have a look. But I can't agree with you on that, Glyn, unfortunately. I think he wants to come on actually in a few weeks' time and maybe talk about some gigs he went to in the 90s. He's been riffling through some old tickets and flyers and things like that. So I think that'd be worth doing. And we can finally ask him to confirm or deny many of the various things that we've already discussed on the pod so far.
Absolutely.
Another comment from my old friend George Alty, who is the man who had the motorcycle accident outside the Elf. He says, again, regarding the Britpop episode, you're underselling Ian Brody a bit. He produced The Fall, Echo and the Bunnymen, and as part of Liverpool, a Second Coming in the 80s. And he wrote with all sorts of folk and a perfect Mersey pop poet. He's like a latter-day Mike Batt, but without the wombles. And I think that's perfectly fair. I think maybe we did brush over the Lightning Seeds a little bit as being the band that did Three Lions and Lucky You and possibly not a lot else. So we might have to retract that statement and give Mr. Brody the credit he deserves.
Yeah, agreed.
And finally, from me on the mailbag this week, it's actually a message from the aforementioned again Adam Greenwood, and he's just popped into the inbox over the last hour or so to say that he has a band that both proves and disproves the Joslin theory, and he nominates the Beastie Boys. So he says both Fight for Your Right to Party and Intergalactic are probably tied as their most famous tracks, but their former is possibly their worst, and their latter is easily one of their best. And again, I have to agree. I think he might have found the artist that breaks the rule there, the exception that proves the rule. Yeah. Because yes, I agree with that heartily. Fight for Your Right to Party is terrible, and Intergalactic's brilliant. So there we are.
Absolutely,
If anybody's got any more thoughts on that, or any more bands they'd like to put forward for the Joslin theory, or anywhere else, or anything else at all, you know where to find us. We'll remind you at the end of the show.
Right, let's move on to today's topic, which, as mentioned, is Formula One's odder moments from the decade. We've each chosen 3 each this time, and we're going to just go through them and reminisce and break them down a bit. So, what's your background what's your relationship with Formula One, Stu?
I have to admit, it's never been a sport that I would make sort of an appointment to view. With regards to motor racing, I've always been a bit more of a touring car fan. I've seen the touring cars live down at Thruxton many times, and I've always kept track of Formula One, but just not in as dedicated a way as any other sport really. But I've got plenty of memories and things to talk about here from watching it, because obviously when it was on terrestrial TV, first of all the BBC in the 90s with Murray, and then moving on to ITV maybe in the later 90s, I think, or was that into the 2000s? I'm not sure. But it was always on a Sunday afternoon. And I was actually talking about this with my dad in the pub last night, and my overriding memory of it is the whole household being very anti Michael Schumacher. I think maybe because my mum, I think my mum and dad found him a little bit arrogant and all that sort of thing, and obviously were supporting the British drivers like Damon Hill at the time and people like that. So yeah, that's my main memory of it always being on, and then having an interest, not too heavy an interest, but still more than enough to talk about here with things I've managed to pull up from my memory. Now I know that you're probably going to take the lead on this episode because I know that you're at the other end of the scale to me on this, aren't you? Very much so.
Yeah. Formula One was basically my life from the end of 95 or mid 95 until Schumacher's first retirement in 2006. And yeah, it was my life. And Schumacher still is to a certain extent my idol. It was proper, about as deep an infatuation as you can get really at that age. So yeah, I would have argued with your mum a lot, I think, because Schumacher, was as I said, was my idol, and this was obviously the period where his career was sort of spanned really, starting in 91, I believe, no, 92. Oh God, I've just said he's my idol, and suddenly I've maybe made a mistake with his career, but I think he started within the 90s anyway. I think it was 91 was his first race, or 92. So yeah, I can talk about it for. I think it would probably be my mastermind subject would be Formula One from 95 to 2006. So yeah, I'm gonna try and keep my waffle down as much as possible, but I can't promise anything. Do you want to start with your first choice of your odd moment from Formula One in the 90s?
Yeah, I certainly can. So when I'm looking at sport in general, whether it's football, motor racing, whatever it happens to be, I don't know whether it's a British thing or something else, but I always tend to look further down the standings. Well, I'm not very interested in champions. Maybe this comes with part of being an Aston Villa supporter. I don't know. That's another debate for another time. But I'm always drawn to, and especially with Formula One, this is borne out. When I'm looking at statistics and previous seasons, I'm always drawn to the smaller teams, the pay drivers, the drivers that were around for maybe one season, or maybe even not even a whole season, maybe just 5 or 6 races while they were able to put some money in the team. And there are a few names. I've got some statistics here of a few of my favourites. The aforementioned Jean-Denis Delatraz, legend of the podcast. 3 races for 2 different teams, 1 finish. Massimiliano Mad Max Papis, who drove 7 times and finished twice for a team called Footwork. Mimo Schiattarella, again, 7 drives for Simtech, 3 finishes. And I've also got down here Andrea Montemini, who had a relatively large career of 20 drives for 3 different teams, Simtech, Pacific, and 40, managing 5 finishes. But there can only be one man when we're talking about drivers who maybe didn't meet their potential, or maybe, frankly speaking, never had the potential in the first place to be in Formula One. And we have to talk about Taki Inoue. 18 drives, 1 for Simtech, and then 17 for Footwork, finishing 5 times now. He has happily admitted in interviews in recent times that he was not good enough to drive in Formula One. And he's sort of taken on giving himself the title of the worst Formula One driver of all time, which I'm not sure, if you look at his statistics, it's very fair, because there will be drivers who had less races and finished less and that sort of thing. So statistically there will be worse drivers, but all round, if you look at his career before that, he had 5 seasons in, I think, Formula 3000 where he never scored a point, he never had a fastest lap, he never won a race. Then he moved up into another class and had a season there where again he did pretty much nothing. And then, because he had the money and was able to bring the sponsorship to a pretty desperate for cash at the time, Footwork Arrow's team managed to get a drive in Formula One. And the 17 drives for Footwork came in the 1995 season. And I've had a look at I've had a look back at two of his greatest moments.
And I know what you're going to say already, but I'm looking forward to this.
Well, if you're not a Formula One fan or you haven't seen these before, then as with most of the things we talk about, it's all on YouTube. I heartily advise you to go and have a look. So the first incident happened after a practice session at Monaco. His car had stalled out on the track, and he was being towed back to the pits. He was inside the car. He didn't have his seatbelts on, and the car was hit by one of the course cars. Rear-ended, which caused it to come off of the truck and roll into the barriers, and he was concussed. He had to have a sort of medical to make sure he was fit to race the next day, and he was fortunately he wasn't seriously hurt, but it was sort of his luck during his Formula One career in microcosm. But the second and possibly more famous incident, because it happened on live TV and was beamed across the world, was during the actual Hungarian Grand Prix, not the practice session. It was during the race. Mm-hmm. Again, the car had failed. It was an engine fire this time. He stopped at the side of the track. Some marshals came to try and assist him to try and put the fire out. He thought, I'm going to try and help them, or I'm going to do this myself. Ran over to the side of the barrier to pick up a fire extinguisher that was there. And as he was coming back, the medical car, which had arrived to check he was okay, actually hits him and runs him over. He sort of bounces off of it to begin with and stands up, and he's still got his fire extinguisher, but then a couple of seconds later he crumples over into a heap. He had a bit of a leg injury, but again, he managed to recover in time for the next race. He then disappears out of Formula One at the end of the 1995 season. Unfortunately, if you ask me, I'd like to have seen more of him. But yeah, Taki Inoue, in his 18 drives in Formula One, is representative for me of all those mid-90s pay drivers that came in for struggling cash-strapped teams, drove a few races, didn't set the world alight, but still, because of that thing where we look at the drivers who maybe didn't set the world alight and didn't achieve maybe what they wanted, we still talk about them today, and they're still sort of revered, really. Maybe just as much as the champions of the time were. So yeah, Taki Inoue.
Yes, brilliant choice. And yeah, long live and may they rest in peace, all those pay drivers that you mentioned. I looked up the incidents again because I was aware of them, and it's always a wince-inducing but also smirk-inducing video. Him getting knocked over by the medical car, the irony being almost too much to bear. There's some great photos of that as well. I don't know if you've seen the photos.
I've not seen the stills, no.
Yeah, the footage is obviously quite grainy. It's very old, and it's been uploaded to YouTube. But there are some really good high-definition photos of him, sort of legs akimbo, rolling across the bonnet. It's quite I get shocking, but again, slightly amusing because he's okay. Yeah, it's a good choice. I mean, I will also just quickly mention that their Footwork Arrows from '95 that he raced in is in my opinion, one of the best ever liveries of a Formula One car, especially later in the season when they added some hype energy drink sponsors. It's just a great looking car. I think 1995 is probably my favourite season for liveries. I don't know whether that's tied in completely with nostalgia because it was the first season I started watching, but I look back now, every car on that grid I think just looks great.
Is that when Benetton was still with the sort of turquoise and stuff like that?
Benetton, I think
that sort of era.
Yeah, in my top 3 liveries of all time, that Benetton, and also the Minardi of that season, which might get mentioned in a little bit.
So there's that footwork of Taki Inoue there. You can see it's got an engine problem. And up there, oh goodness gracious me! Now that's absolutely appalling. The marshal there, it's Inoue, has gone across the front of the emergency car as it's come up to deal with the fire or what could have happened to that footwork car. And sadly, Inoue just did not look and see. Which, poor old Inoue is always the man who seems to be suffering. Exactly the same thing, or virtually the same thing, happened at Monaco when he was hit by a course car, when his arrows was being towed back after it had broken down in qualifying.
So my first choice, I'm going to do my choices in chronological order, as I often do. So my first one is a race, and it's specifically the Monaco Grand Prix of 1996, which was held on the 19th of May, sixth race of the calendar that season, and it was crazy, basically. From start to finish, it was wild, and it's most famous for being the race where only 3 drivers finished, which I think might be a record. I assume is a record. It's certainly never been anything close to that while I've been watching it. It was a soaking wet. I mean, I don't know if listeners know, Monaco is it's a street circuit, very windy, tricky at the best of times, but it was tipping it down with rain. So it starts off, the retirement started so early that actually the aforementioned Andrea Montemini, who was racing for 40 at the time, gotta love 40. What a great team. He didn't even line up on the grid because he crashed in the warm-up. And 40, with their limited budget, didn't have a spare car. So that's it started before even the lights went green. But then, the race started. Schumacher was on pole, crashed on the first lap, and a number of other people went out. So after 5 laps, there were only 13 cars still running. So, it was, hectic to begin with. So there was crash after crash, and then there were retirements. Damon Hill crashed out from the lead. He got engine failure coming out of the tunnel. It looked like he was cruising to victory at that point, but he retired. John Lacey, who was then leading, he went out with a suspension failure. Luca Badoer, who's going to get a big mention later in my third choice, he was running 6 laps down and he crashed into championship contender Jacques Villeneuve, or they collided. I don't know if who caused it. And then 5 or 6 laps left, if that. My favourite crash of the whole race, which was when Eddie Irvine spun coming out of Portier. And he tried to do the rarely seen in Formula One 3-point turn to get out of it. But whilst he was completing this, he was crashed into behind by Mika Salo, who was then in turn crashed into behind by Mika Hakkinen, creating this sort of brilliant traffic jam image of cars just stopped on the track back to back. Mika Hakkinen furious, and it jumped straight out and. It looks like he's going to punch something. You'll notice that if you watch it up on YouTube, which you should. So then Frentzen, who's running 4th and last, this is going to the final lap. He now sees that he can't get anything better than 4th, so he just gives up, just pulls into the pits because there's no point. And then that leaves the 3 drivers who are on track left, led by Oliver Panis to win, who then goes on to win his only Grand Prix race in the Ligier. And was also there. No, it was Ligier's first win since the 80s. And then I think second was Coulthard, I think, and McLaren, and Herbert came third. And it's one of those races where it feels like so much is going on that it feels like it's gone on all day, And that's why I've chosen it. It was very much of my era. Love the cars of this period. Schumacher was at Ferrari now, so it's the beginning of my love of the Schumacher Ferrari era. And it was just a crazy race, and that's why I've chosen it.
Brilliant. I've watched this. I've watched the highlights back on YouTube. High comedy. It's more of a. It comes across as more of a touring car race with the amount of incident and events that happen. But watching this race back triggered a memory, and it's something I hadn't thought about for 20 years, maybe more, in my old bedroom when I was 7 or 8 years old. And I think my dad must have got this free with, he might have gone to Quick Fit and got some tyres or had a tyre change or something like that. But I came into my possession was an A1 poster, and it was Goodyear tyres, and it was 300 Formula One race wins, right? And on the poster was a side-on, like a sort of graphic, sort of technical drawing of every single car that ever won a Formula One race up to that point with Goodyear tyres. Yeah. And I always remember that in amongst these legions of great drivers down the years who had won hundreds of races with these tyres, Olivier Panis was there with his Ligier for the Monaco Grand Prix of '96, and that always sort of, again, looking for the back markers and the sort of teams that are lower down the order, that always stuck out to me as, oh, that team managed to win a race, and they were on the poster, and it was a bit of a unique thing on the poster. Went on eBay, found the poster, bought it. So that's that's coming back into my life.
Oh, that's brilliant.
I got it for £8. I could have had, if I'd wanted to spend £25, I could have got the same poster signed by Nigel Mansell. But I thought that I could probably do without that and just pay the £8 for the original. So yeah, that's winging its way back in, and I'll post a picture up on our socials when that arrives. But yeah, as I said, I love the races that are full of incident, and it's not something you really get much these days, is it? A race that has so much happen like that. I mean, if you look at the races, there have been recent. I don't want to get bogged down in the here and now, because that's not what we're here to do. But of this season so far, I can think of maybe 2 or 3 sort of talking points in terms of racing incidents throughout the whole season.
Yeah.
And it just seems like back in those days, it seemed to happen a lot more, and I think the sport's probably worse off for it.
Yeah.
But if it means that drivers are being kept safer and things like that, then it's probably not such a bad thing.
Yeah, I still think it's a bad thing, even if they are more safe. I guess it comes down to it's probably linked to the pay drivers, isn't it? Like, if there's less of a gulf now between the fastest and the slowest on the grid.
Yes, you're quite right. Yeah,
I think that's just another reason why we are poorer for the lack of pay and poor quality drivers on the Formula 1 grid now. So that's a real shame. Just a quick quiz question for you again. Can you tell me what was unusual about David Coulthard's attire for this race? That's attire, not tyre. Like what he was wearing, or something odd about it.
So is it? Is it related? Is it helmet related?
It is helmet related, yeah.
Okay, was he forced to wear? Did he have to wear somebody else's like spare helmet or something?
Yes, exactly.
Oh,
that is
brilliant.
a great guess. Yeah. He was struggling with his visor because it was so wet. It was kept steaming up, so he had to ask Michael Schumacher to borrow one of his helmets. And Schumacher agreed. And if you look at any pictures of Coulthard in that race, he is wearing Schumacher's helmet. So it appears that Schumacher is driving the McLaren, but it's actually 2 Michael Schumachers around on the track for the first lap.
Michael Schumachers, fantastic.
And that helmet now sits in Coulthard's Motorsport Museum in Scotland. So,
good stuff.
It's nice.
I love stuff like that. Going back to the very first episode when we spoke about Chelsea wearing the Coventry away kit because they turned up only with their home kit. But I love stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's brilliant. I didn't know that. I genuinely didn't know that. So I'm chuffed that I managed to answer that.
Yeah,
brilliant.
That was a great guess.
And that's Irvine and Sarlo and Hakkinen. Oh my goodness!
Okay, what's your second choice?
Okay, well, buckle in because I've got lots of notes on this, and it's very complex, but I've tried to pick out the most salient points. So I want to take you back to September 1991, and I want to tell you the story of the short-lived Andrea Montemini team. Now, I don't know if you've looked into this yourself.
Yeah.
You have?
I have.
Okay. So it's September 1991, and an Italian shoe designer, Andrea Sassetti, he decides to buy a Formula 1 team called Coloni. In the previous season, they'd failed pre-qualification for every single race that year, so they weren't competitive. And he decided to take them on with a lot of their former staff, and a deal was struck to build a new car. And it was, so it all looked fine, and they were going to start the 1992 season in South Africa. When they got to South Africa, the team arrived with some old Coloni cars instead of their new chassis. They were excluded from the Grand Prix because they hadn't paid the deposit for new teams to join the World Championship. So Andrea Sassetti's argument was that it wasn't a new team as such. He'd simply taken over Coloni, renamed it, and entered them. But what he hadn't done was he hadn't bought Coloni's entry to the championship. He just bought the team itself. So they were excluded from that race. The 2 drivers they had, 2 chaps called Alex Caffey and Enrico Battaglia, were then both dropped from the team because they were criticising the team and the preparation and the way the way they were going about things. So Andrea Montemini turned up for the Brazilian Grand Prix, the next Grand Prix, with two more experienced drivers in Roberto Moreno and a chap called Perry McCarthy, who, here's a quiz question for you. Which TV role did Perry McCarthy play briefly?
Well, I unfortunately have just looked this up on Wikipedia because I was doing some prep, and I know the answer is the Stig.
He was the original Stig, yes.
The black Stig.
That's right, absolutely. So these two were the new drivers for Andrea Montemini. Moreno failed to pre-qualify, but McCarthy wasn't granted a super license, so he didn't run. And then things begin to go much further downhill. Enrico Bertaggia reapproached the team saying he'd found $1 million in sponsorship funds, and they wanted him to return in place of Perry McCarthy, but the FIA didn't let them do that. So as they were quite bitter at the loss of funding by this point, Sassetti, he began to basically ignore Perry McCarthy and just concentrated all the team's resources on Roberto Moreno. He actually then managed to qualify Moreno for the third race in Monaco, but he retired after 11 laps with an engine failure. And then again, bad luck, disorganization, things start to go downhill again. In Canada, the team arrived without any engines. So they had to borrow some from another team, which allowed Moreno to get a few laps out, but then he failed to pre-qualify again. Again, McCarthy didn't run at all. They missed the French Grand Prix entirely because the truck was stuck in a French truck driver strike. All the sponsors then withdraw, and by now Andrea Sassetti is funding the team entirely himself. And by this point, they're using McCarthy's entry in his second car effectively as a spare for Roberto Moreno, and he's getting poorer and poorer treatment. It says here, or in the notes I've made, that at the British Grand Prix, he was then sent out on wet weather tyres on a dry track for his practice. And then in Hungary, he was allowed out of the pit lane 45 seconds before the end of pre-qualifying, which made it obviously impossible for him to set a lap time. And at this point, the team are warned that they have to make a meaningful attempt to run Perry McCarthy's car, or they will just be excluded entirely. So by the time they reach the Belgian Grand Prix, both cars by this point, or in this race, are actually guaranteed entry into qualifying because other teams have withdrawn. So they didn't have to go with pre-qualifying; they could qualify. But they were the slowest on the track. Neither qualified to race. And in the same weekend, Andrea Sassetti was actually arrested in the paddock for allegedly forging invoices. And a week later, they were expelled for the remainder of the 1992 season. Refused entry for the next race, obviously, into the Italian Grand Prix. Andrea Montemini lasted for 12 races in total in 1992. And it's one of my absolute favourite Formula One stories of all time, just for from top to finish, obviously an absolute horror show. I feel very, very sorry for Perry McCarthy in all of this, who, as I read, was quite a promising F1 driver, and obviously never got the chance he deserved at the hands of the ruthless Mr. Sassetti. And it's probably a good thing that Formula One teams aren't run like this anymore.
Yeah.
I know there are instances of things happening with teams, but not on this level. It's definitely an outlier. But every time I revisit the story, it's I find something else that boggles the mind, and yeah, it's just something that makes me chuckle.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. It really is. Just not the sort of thing you would ever see anymore. Like you say, it's just sort of died out there, along with those sort of drivers, those pay drivers, the micro teams. Sadly, have pretty much all gone the way of the what's that phrase? Gone the way of the wildebeest? Dodo?
Yeah, something like that. Write in if you know.
Yeah.
But it's literally just, yeah, I'm a shoe designer. I've got a load of money. What am I going to do? I know, I'll buy an F1 team and just play around with that for a bit,
Yeah.
But
that said, I suppose that's kind of what Red Bull did, but Red Bull clearly had a lot more money than this Italian shoe designer.
Yes, yeah.
But there was so much of that, wasn't there, in the 90s, the early 90s, just like CEOs of or owners of big companies just starting Formula One teams. Like Scuderia Italia was another one, set up by an Italian. It's always Italians, isn't it? Italian steel magnate. Yeah, it's I miss that. I do miss that. One of the reasons why I'm not so interested in the sport anymore. But yeah, it's a great choice. It's such a cracking story that it's worth letting people know about it, because it's not a team name that many people are going to remember, I don't think.
Indeed. No, well worth some extra research if this is your kind of thing, definitely.
Thank you very much, Martin Brundle. We go to pre-qualifying, and this is Perry McCarthy, who did one single lap on the Thursday morning.
My second choice is a specific incident of an incident-packed race, probably my favourite ever race, or most exciting race I've ever seen, which was the Belgian Grand Prix of 1998. And again, this was deep in my Schumacher love, and it was a championship where Schumacher was racing with Mick Häkkinen for the title. The Belgian Grand Prix came sort of roughly halfway through the season, maybe slightly towards the later stages. So there was a lot riding on it, and it was just a wild race from start to finish. Much like the Monaco Grand Prix I just talked about, it was wet, which always causes more incident. And it started off with one of the biggest, almost destructive crashes in Formula One history, or modern history at least, where 3/4 of the field were all wiped out in one giant melee. So yes, the race started with that incident. It restarted, and there was another crash at the start. Mika Häkkinen went out. He was obviously, as I said, one of the title contenders. So on lap 24, Michael Schumacher is leading by 30 seconds. Looks like he's cruising to victory. There's not really any other challengers. Häkkinen's already out. I think Coulthard's out as well at this point. Eddie Irvine, his teammate at Ferrari, is struggling, and there weren't really any other drivers that close to the championship at that point. So he's miles ahead, and he's approaching David Coulthard, who I just said was out of the race. Actually, he wasn't out of the race. He went out, I think, and then he limped to the pits and then came back out. So he was a long way down. He was coming up to be lapped for at least the first time by Schumacher. And as Schumacher's coming through the spray, David Coulthard is getting the blue flags telling him to slow down, and he's also getting a message in his ear on his radio saying, Schumacher's behind you, slow down, let him past. And that's exactly what he does. He slows down on the racing line and to let Schumacher pass. But Schumacher, who is, covered in spray, can't see what's going on, doesn't realise that he's slowing down, doesn't see the speed differential, and just goes straight into the back of him, leading to one of the great Murray Walker commentary moments.
David Coulthard in these appalling conditions. Oh, God! Michael Schumacher hits David Coulthard and is out of the Belgian Grand Prix.
So both drivers limp back to the pits. Schumacher's only got 3 wheels. He's hammering the steering wheel. If you watch the replay on YouTube, you can see him doing that at one point. And Coulthard is missing his rear wing. But yeah, so the next thing we know, Damon Hill's in the lead, and we're seeing the race again. But then the cameras cut back to the pit lane, and we see Schumacher storming down the pit lane on foot, obviously. He's taking his helmet off, and he looks like a man on a mission. He's sort of being held back by a Ferrari mechanic or two. And we all know, well, where's he going? I think Murray Walker says, oh, he's heading to the marshals, to the race stewards, head stewards or something like that. But I think we all know he's not going there. He's going to David Coulthard's garage. And then we see him burst in, and then it's just a melee. There's all the Ferrari mechanics and the McLaren mechanics sort of create this to separate them. You can see Schumacher's like trying to grab him. He's pointing at him. Coulthard's gesticulating in a very sort of British way. We can sort of work out what he's saying, I think.
Yeah.
And then Schumacher gets dragged away, and then he storms off back down the pit lane towards his own garage. And it was just a very dramatic moment. And it was, it was the first time I'd ever seen 2 drivers sort of have a physical confrontation at a race. And it was actually really frustrating for me at the time, because Schumacher had sort of lost the 10 points for the win he was almost inevitably going to get. It was a really important part of the season, and I think in hindsight, well, you could say that it lost him that championship, because he only lost it on the last race, as it turned out. It was quite close, so it was really frustrating. It took me a long time to get over that. and I still don't think I'm fully over it. So it was really annoying, and yeah, it was a really wild moment of a really wild race, and yeah, that's why I've chosen it for the list. Do you remember it at all?
I do. I remember one of the things that I remember was it Damon Hill won the race.
You did,
Is that
yes.
right?
I forgot
You
to
did.
mention that, yeah.
And that's Jordan's only ever
It's
race
not their
win.
own. It's not their only. I think it was their first though.
A first, sorry.
And they've been
first.
around for a long time, so yeah, it was massive.
Yeah. No, yeah, I do remember this being quite a thing at the time, and going back to what I said before, I'm sure that my parents would have met this with no little glee. But again, watching this and watching back the clips of all the races from this period is, I forget how much I also liked and it's only a little thing, but the graphics, the on-screen graphics at the time with the team name and the little yellow box with the race position, and the fact that the team name was written in turquoise and all that sort of thing. Yeah. It's one of my favourite ever TV graphic designs, if you like. And I mean, I know we're going way deep here, but I just enjoyed that. And the same graphics are present on F1 World Grand Prix 2, which is a Nintendo 64 game that I'm messing about on at the moment, coincidentally as Damon Hill in the Jordan. Nice. I managed to pilot him to an 11th place to finish in Australia a couple of nights ago, so I'll keep you informed on that as we progress. But yeah, no, and you've chosen a really, with your two races with multiple pile-ups, just excitement and action all over, and like I said before, I think it's something that's probably sadly lacking these days, and you definitely don't see drivers trying to get into fistfights with each other anymore. No. I don't think so. Again, something that maybe they should consider bringing back in order to up the entertainment factor.
Really throws his steering wheel out of the cockpit with every good reason. You can understand his fury, because he's now effectively lost the chance of taking the world championship lead. Now, what is he up to? He's storming down the pit lane, presumably to go. Look at him. He's saying, "I'm going to the stewards." James, can you enlighten? He's going to Coulthard. He's going to have it out with David Coulthard.
Cool. What's your second choice? No, your third choice. Sorry.
Yeah, that's one for me. So I had to go back and watch this to make sure I actually remembered it correctly, because it was something that sort of, did that happen? I seem to remember, reading or seeing that happened. So it's the 1991 Canadian Grand Prix, and this is Nigel Mansell, who was leading the race by 50 seconds going into the last lap. So it's been a masterful performance from Nigel. He's had a difficult start to the season, but it looks like things are going to pick up here with a win at Montreal. So he's leading from Nelson Piquet in the Benetton, as I say, by almost a minute. He's going to win. He knows it. The crowd knows it. Everybody else knows it. And as he crosses the line very early on into the lap, he's already waving. He's waving to the crowd as he begins his last lap as a sort of as an early celebration. And we all know what happens when you celebrate too early. Nothing can go wrong now. And again, it's a great piece of Murray commentary. But on the last hairpin, literally the last corner before the finishing line comes into sight, the Mansell car slows down to a halt and just stops completely. And the rumor is, it's never been confirmed, but the rumor is that because he was concentrating on waving to the crowd so much, instead of completing the last lap as quickly as he could in order to cement the win, he'd either failed to change gear for the hairpin, and just stalled the car, or that he'd actually turned off the engine accidentally while waving to the crowd. He of course denied this, and his version of events was that the gearbox had gone into neutral as he shifted down. Williams himself said that the car had suffered an electrical failure. Now, the electrical failure angle was actually true, but it turns out it was induced by Nigel Mansell and not keeping the revs sufficiently high on the engine to actually drive the electrical system. So the gearbox got stuck, That's why it went into neutral, and that's why he then couldn't obviously get the car going again. And eventually, he was classified 6th. Nelson Piquet came round and took the win from being 50 seconds down on the last lap, which has to be, I think, the biggest margin that somebody has ever come back from in the shortest possible time.
Yeah.
In the shortest time to win a race. Again, a great bit of Murray commentary, and eventually Nigel finished 2nd in the championship behind Ayrton Senna that year, but not by enough points to have made this vital. But it's you just have to wonder why. Why would you do that? You know, you're winning the race by keep the waving to the crowd and everything for the lap afterwards.
Yeah, you've got the slowing down lap. That's when you wave. You don't need to wave the start. It's not like you finish when you get to the line and then that's it. I don't really like Nigel Mansell. He was before my time, although he did make a sort of complete failure of a comeback in *96. I think he drove a couple of times from McLaren, but he was literally too big for the car, so it didn't really work. So I don't, something about him I don't particularly like. So I'm kind of quite satisfied by this. But that's it really. That's all I've got to say. He's just I'm just quite satisfied by it, and well done to Nelson Piquet. Was he driving a Benetton, or was he?
He was Benetton, in the camel livery. Which that reminds me, Olivier Panis, the car that won in Monaco, had the lovely Gaulois sponsorship. Yeah. You've got Nelson Piquet winning in the camel car. I know it's bad and everything else, and I know we shouldn't be promoting it to the more impressionable.
I know what you're going to say, and it's true.
But I used to love the cigarette, the tobacco liveries. Benson and Hedges for Jordan. Who was when I had Lucky Strike? Was that British American?
That was BAR,
Yeah. Who were British American tobacco, but just as a race. John Player special. If we're going back into the 80s.
Marlborough. So many great Marlboroughs.
Yeah. Rothmans, of course. Williams. Absolutely fantastic, and that is another thing that I miss about the whole thing is the tobacco sponsorship. I know it's bad, but just from an aesthetic and a stylistic view, some of the best liveries I think there have ever been were the tobacco sponsor cars. Absolutely. And then they started doing this stuff with like changing the names slightly. So didn't Benson and Hedges become Buzzing Hornets?
Yeah, and it was bitten and hisses when they had the snake livery, and various funny combinations of that, and that was also part of the fun of the cigarette sponsorship, wasn't it? What are they going to do to cover it up? Also, Mile 7, another so many beautiful liveries for Benetton and for Renault.
Was West one for McLaren? I think West was a fag brand as well.
Yeah, exactly. Winfield. Anyway, let's just stop.
Come on now.
this is just for our benefit.
Just a final word on Mansell then. I think, as you say, he had a comeback that sort of stalled. He did go on to go into the touring cars for Ford Mondeo. And I seem to remember there was some sort of thing because he was always number 5, wasn't he? I think. He came in halfway through a season and somebody was already number 5 and he wanted to be number 5 and they couldn't change it and all this sort of thing. So he became number 55, but he sort of demanded that his number was red on the car instead of black and all this sort of thing. So I seem to remember something happening. That was about 98, I think. But Nigel Mansell with probably one of the most commanding leads in Formula One history, failing to win because he grandstanded 1 lap too early.
To go through and complete lap 69 to victory in Canada, and he's going to beat Nelson Piquet by some 50 seconds. He's taking the hairpin very... He's stopping! Nigel Mansell, just a few hundred yards from the flag on the last lap. He's stopping, he's banging his steering wheel in frustration. Something has happened. It looks as though he's out of the race.
Right, my final one is a bit of a sad memory, and it relates to the 1999. I think I said too many nines there. The 1999 European Grand Prix, which was held at the Nürburgring. One of the great 90s circuits, and is still used today, I think. So this was another really good race, another wet race. So that led to a lot of incidents. And it was, just an interesting race where lots of people who crashed out. And it was ultimately won by Johnny Herbert in his final Grand Prix win, and Stewart's first and only victory as a manufacturer.
Mm-hmm.
So it had that. It's actually a 1-2 for Stewart, because I think Rubens Barrichello came second in the other.
I was going to say, was he driving for them? Yeah.
Yeah, he was. When I was reading up on it, it said the younger driver Rubens Barrichello, and that just seemed really odd. The idea of Rubens Barrichello being the younger driver in any team. So yeah, the race had been quite wild, but there was a moment that I want to talk about specifically, and it came quite late in the race. There were just 13 laps to go. And a driver called Luca Badoer, who I've already mentioned earlier, he found himself in fourth. Now, a little bit of context about Luca Badoer. He was, at this point, he was driving for Minardi, which I think might be my favourite ever Formula One team. A classic backmarker team, owned and run by Gianluca Minardi, I think his name is. It was just like a passion project for him. It wasn't just about the money. They'd run from the late 80s until the early 2000s. Micro budget, based in Faenza, I think, in Italy, and I got into them much like with Norwich City because I just liked the colours that they used in '95, which was the season I started watching. Probably my favourite ever Formula One livery.
Yeah.
So that's Minardi, and that's who Badoer was driving for. And Luca Badoer was a driver I'd liked for a while because of his connection with Minardi, but also other micro teams he'd raced for before. So he'd raced for the Scuderia Italia team that I mentioned earlier as well, which was a weird team that sort of looked and sounded like Ferrari because it was called Scuderia and it was Italian and they had red cars, but it wasn't. It was just another micro team. And he also raced for 40 Ford, I think it was, in '95, one of the slowest teams of that year. Famous for being so slow that the 40 was amusingly claimed to be the number of times they were lapped per race. So yeah, this was Badoer's fifth season in F1, and he hadn't scored a point, which was a record for the most Formula One races started without scoring a point. So this was big. He was running fourth in this race. This was massive. He was potentially going to finally get that point, for not just for him, but for also Minardi, who'd won very few points up to this point. And then, heartbreakingly, with just 13 laps to go, his Minardi suffers a gearbox failure. He pulls over, climbs out, and then promptly sinks to his knees and sobs over his Minardi. And I remember watching it and it just being heartbreaking because I loved this team, and it was going to be so great to see this result, and he deserved it. He'd been racing for so long. And it was just a very rare moment of emotion that you see in Formula One. Certainly I think the first time I'd ever seen a driver cry, especially like during a race like that. So it was just a real moment that stood out, a very melancholy moment. And unfortunately, he did stop racing at the end of that season, and he does still hold a record for the most Formula One races without scoring a point. He had a little stint coming back with Ferrari because he became their test driver after this, and he had 2 races for them in 2009. So 10 year, it was a 10-year gap when Felipe Massa got injured at Hungary and he came in. I think Ferrari actually said they gave him the drive to say thank you for all his years of service as a test driver for them. So that was quite nice.
Well, that's very nice, yeah.
But it didn't, unfortunately, result in any points. So yeah, I just wanted to choose it because I wanted to shout out Luca Badoer and give him some respect that I think he deserves, and also just because it was a standout moment and some emotion in the sport, which is always good to see. And it was my third and final choice.
Absolutely, a tip of the hat to Mr. Badoer. Again, I watched this and it is genuinely, if you've read up on the situation beforehand, it's genuinely heartbreaking to watch. And even though I knew it was coming, I actually found it quite difficult. I was very, very sad for him, but it sounds like it ended happily with his couple of drives for Ferrari years later, just for his service. And a word on Minardi again, probably the classic. I mean, we've been talking about teams like 40, Footwork, Simtech, Pacific, but Minardi are the only one who I remember were actually there over a long period of time, and they were competing every year and obviously getting nowhere, but they were still there every race, battling away. And again, it's that thing where I mean, the example is there in yourself, where you're a massive Schumacher fan, but you've also got a soft spot and look out for Minardi, and that is obviously something that I do as well, with things, as I've already explained. So yeah, and I remember looking out for them during the 90s as well, for that exact reason. So yeah, a great choice to finish off with, and as I say, I'm really glad that it did end happily for him in the end.
This is Badoer out of the race. Marc Genet moves up a place into 6th position in the other Minardi. Luca Badoer loses a potential world point.
And now the very fashionable
doing a Hakkinen. Yep. Luca Badoer knowing what has happened to him.
Right. We have a few bits of correspondence on this topic, because we have been giving you a bit of a heads up about the topics we're going to be talking about, and allowing you some time to think of your choices. I have, what do I have here? I have Ian Pook, friend of the pod. Ian Pook has given me a couple of choices here. He's said, and this is really crazy, I remember this happening, final race of the season in 1997 at Jerez, European Grand Prix, I think it was referred to. Schumacher, Villeneuve and Frentzen all set identical qualifying times.
Is that right?
Qualifying to the thousandth of a second, they were all exactly the same. And also his second choice was the Murray Walker Damon Hill Pizza Hut advert, which you may or may not remember. I will post a clip here.
And here comes the pasta.
It's a pizza, Murray.
Hill's going for it. And he spun his pizza through 180 degrees.
So thanks for that, Ian. Do you have anything there, Stu?
Yeah, just a quick one, again from a friend of the pod, Tim Parker, who nominates Gerhard Berger coming out of the pits at Estoril in 1993 and just crashing straight into the barrier on his exit from the pits. There's nothing really more to say about that. It's an extremely funny clip. Yeah, if you get the chance. Do have a look. I don't remember that Murray Walker Damon Hill advert at all, I have to say. So I'll definitely look that up in a second. No, but thank you very much for all your correspondence on that. We do appreciate it. Do keep it coming in. We're not sure, in typical pod fashion, we're not sure what we're going to talk about next time. But when we are sure, we will be sure to put it out on the socials, so that you can get in touch ahead of time with your thoughts on that topic. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's spot on.
Excellent stuff. Well, I have really enjoyed this one, mate. Absolutely. Yeah. And I would like to do, I've said this before, but I would like to do touring cars in the 90s as well at some point, if that's okay.
Yeah, me too. Also, maybe throw in some rallying as well.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of motorsport out there from the decade that was very big part of my life. So
well, there's the Gabriele Tarquini crash, right, which we have to we're gonna talk about that just so we can play the Murray Walker clip. So yeah, right, I'm just going to read out now the Twitter and email so you can get in contact. If you want to find us on Twitter, it's at allright90s, all letters, no numbers, and you can email us on allright90s@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook. If you just search for It'll Be Alright in the 90s pod, I believe our it's Facebook /Alright90s, basically, if you want to find us directly. And that's where we post what we're going to be talking about soon, and you can sort of interact with us and have a bit of a debate and discussion on there. So please do that. That's it for now. And as Stu said, we'll let you know what we're going to talk about next. But it's been fun. So let's pull into the pits and climb out and go and find the driver that planted us off and go and have a fight with them.
Yeah. Great. Well, that's all. So thank you very much and see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. See you in a couple of weeks. Are you there?
Oh, I am, yeah.
I lost you for a few seconds there.
Yeah,
sorry, you froze.
Too.
Okay. Well, that probably gives us an opportunity to edit that whole bit out then.